What's up, everybody? I'll just start out by saying this is the most unique conjecture I've ever heard about the purpose of the pyramids. It's an idea that I never thought in a million years anybody would come up with. And I was kind of left speechless the first time I heard this. I'll let you guys decide if that's because I was in awe of the brilliance I had just heard, or if it was for some other reason. So we'll run through that, and then I'll throw my 2 cents in on why I think they, quote, baffled the ceilings of the chambers in the pyramid. You know, I've heard a lot of other people's theories about this type of thing, but I've hardly even talked about the pyramids in my 6-year YouTube career. I did a video a couple months ago about the theorized volcano construction theory, but other than that, I've kind of left it up to the pros. And the pyramid theories kind of have all of the same hallmarks as the online groupthink subjects, to where people will say things that aren't entirely accurate, but then the next person will take that as a gospel truth and build up a whole theory on top of it. You can build the most beautiful Taj Mahal of internet theories, but if you built all this on top of quicksand or an idea that wasn't true, then the whole thing's gonna sink. Or at least that's how things have worked out for all of known history. But the internet is a different animal and facts don't matter. It's what feels right. So let's get into this. You guys can tell me how you feel about it, not what you think about it.
First time going in the Red Pyramid was really the impetus of my entire hypothesis that the Egyptian pyramids were designed to produce chemicals on an industrial scale, because these chambers are chemical reaction chambers. They have all the designs of manipulation of physics to create and facilitate chemical reactions, specifically the tiered vault of the chamber itself. And I knew that the staining was indicative of the chemical reactions that were occurring inside of these chambers, because the staining gets darker and darker the further you go into the structure, where it accumulates most in the upper vault of the second chamber before the reactant gases are moved into the final synthesis chamber, which is where the smell of ammonia is most pronounced in that final chamber. That smell is coming from the final chamber because that was the final synthesis chamber where the actual ammonia solution was being produced.
Okay, so he's talking about the Red Pyramid specifically, with its unique interior design that's completely different from the other pyramids. And they were using this as a chemical reaction chamber to produce ammonia, and most likely the other pyramids were producing different chemicals. It is the ancient land of Khem, after all. So you got my attention. Please continue.
The first step in the process is filling the lower 2 chambers with water above the level of the connecting passage. So between the first 2 chambers, you have a connecting passage in the middle. And if you fill that connecting passage with water, it will fill both chambers to the same level. And what this does is create an isolated reaction space inside each one of the reactors, because you're essentially sealing it off where no air or anything can go inside the chamber. And you may have noticed that inside of the primary chamber, the first chamber, there is a hole in the western wall that has been filled in with concrete. And there's a bunch of staining right above this hole. So clearly there was something flowing up out of the hole into the upper space of the reaction vault. And I propose that this is methane gas, which is the initial reactant in our modern day Haber process for the manufacture of aqueous. We actually make liquid ammonia today. My hypothesis is that the Red Pyramid produced an aqueous solution of ammonia, which is ammonia gas dissolved in water. A little bit different than liquid ammonia, which is ammonia gas supercooled into a liquid form. So it's a little bit different in terms of the final product, same chemical composition. So the first stage is filling that first chamber with water and isolating the reaction space, introducing methane gas. As you raise the water level in the chamber, it will compress the methane gas, which is water insoluble, which means that it won't dissolve in the water. So the water essentially acts like a plunger, pushing the gas into the upper vault of the chamber. And you'll notice that the chamber is tiered. So you have reduced volume the higher you go in the chamber. So as you're pressing that gas into the upper vault of the chamber, you are decreasing the volume and increasing the pressure, which is a great way to facilitate chemical reactions, is by increasing temperature and pressure. So these are the basic physics 101 mechanisms of operation that are involved in the operation of the Red Pyramid. It also involves oriented external electric fields, which is where things get a little bit more complicated when we talk about the power source of the Egyptian pyramids, which is lightning, which provides the heat source for the chemical reactions. So essentially in the first chamber, it's a steam reformer where steam and methane react to produce hydrogen and carbon monoxide. Then you lower the water in that chamber. And as soon as there's an aperture or an opening in between chamber 1 and chamber 2, these high temperature, high pressure gases will flow through the connecting shaft into the second chamber. And there's actually tons of staining on the southern wall of the first chamber that shows that flow pattern moving from the upper vault through the connecting passage into the second chamber. The process is then repeated in the second chamber where the water level is raised, and the hydrogen and carbon monoxide from the first stage react with nitrogen and oxygen from the air to produce hydrogen, nitrogen, and carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide is soluble in water and will dissolve into the water in the chamber, which is drained away, leaving the two primary reactant gases of hydrogen and nitrogen. Those hydrogen and nitrogen gases are then pushed through the connecting shaft from the upper vault of the second chamber into the final synthesis chamber. Your northern shaft is then activated, pushing the water all the way up in the final synthesis chamber, where those hydrogen and nitrogen gases react to produce gaseous ammonia. And gaseous ammonia is highly soluble in water, so that gaseous ammonia will dissolve into the water in the chamber, hence the intense smell of ammonia in the final synthesis chamber. And then that aqueous ammonia solution is drained out of the pit that now exists inside of the final synthesis chamber. And I have a speculation that, so there's a lot of work that went into hauling all those stones out and digging that pit inside of that chamber. So there had to be something in that chamber that gave them the idea, okay, let's excavate into this chamber and pull out all these stones. So I propose that that is the outlet shaft that gave them the inspiration to start digging in that final synthesis chamber where they removed all of those stones out.
Okay. Wow. Where do we begin here? Now, I know from the comments that the majority of you guys think like I do. What kind of surprised me was how many people, when I casually mentioned this a few videos back, were like, yeah, man, pyramids were chemical factories. So I'm not trying to be rude, but if somebody's going to put out a theory like this for public consumption, then you really shouldn't be surprised if people have other thoughts about it. And I think this is a great exercise in critical thinking. So I'll just start off by simplifying everything he just said. He's saying that the whole reason the pyramids were built were to compress gases and then zap it with a lightning bolt. And hey, that is an explanation for all the different little puzzle pieces we have to this. You have a stone vaulted or baffled ceiling. You have the smell of ammonia inside, and everybody knows that granite conducts electricity, and this was an ancient Tesla technology. Actually, Tesla probably got his ideas from Egypt. And I'll even add some weight to ancient land of Khem and chemists. When I did this video last year, it turns out that the whole reason we have hard liquor today is because in the early 1600s, a guy was working off of old Egyptian knowledge for perfume making and accidentally discovered how to distill alcohol. So I'm good with the idea that the ancient Egyptians probably knew a lot more than mainstream gives them credit for. So let's break this down into its component pieces. And my first question would be, okay, why are they making ammonia on an industrial scale?
The primary application for ammonia is for fertilizers. Ammonia is one of the most important chemicals that we manufacture in our modern chemical industry, and 90% of it is used for fertilizer. It actually led to the transformation of our modern society during the Industrial Revolution. And interestingly...
Okay, so I know that people are coming at this from all different points of view, but can we all agree that there are, in fact, thousands of scholars that can read Egyptian hieroglyphics? It wasn't just one guy that translated these and said, this is what it says. There are thousands of people that have also learned to read it and verified that. And there was one thing that made the Nile just absolutely amazing. It was magical to the ancient peoples. And it was world famous for this one specific attribute. You know what that is? Well, every year, like clockwork, it floods the entire Nile Valley and Delta and leaves a 6-inch layer of brand new fertilized mud. All of this is eroded away from the mountains up in Ethiopia. This made Egypt the breadbasket of the Greco-Roman era Mediterranean, and it was great. Year after year, you had this pristine black soil that would just lay itself out there, and then it was hundreds of miles of desert in every direction, so it's very easily defensible. So out of everywhere in the entire world, I would say Egypt is the last place that needs to produce ammonia for fertilizer. That's taking a 21st century problem and applying it to somewhere that doesn't need it. But okay, they could have just been producing it to sell it to other people. Okay, let's move on to the next thing. Why the baffled ceilings? Well, let me give you a couple of the clues.
This corbelling here, and this is also a style which we find in the Giza pyramids, particularly the Great Pyramid in the Grand Gallery, for instance. So it's almost like the Red Pyramid of Dashur is a prototype of the Great Pyramid. We can see some of the corbelling of the roof. So we just climbed the stairs, and look, you can see we're really close to this kind of corbelled roof, just like we find in the Grand Gallery of the Great Pyramid.
Okay, so they use this corbelling, baffling, whatever you want to call it, basically in every open area in the pyramids. You can even see they did this above a narrow stairwell, and they do this through all the tunnels as well. So why did they do this everywhere? The claim is that they did this inside of these chambers to fill up with water, decrease the surface area, and compress gases. So that means that only the last little bit above the red lines are where the gas is going to be compressed to. And I don't know why they did 2 chambers on the left and then one is just going to fill up by itself on the right. We'll talk about how airtight those rocks are in a minute. But why did they build the ceilings the same in tunnels and stairwells if it wasn't going to be used for the same purpose as the combustion chamber? Okay, let's say that we're building the pyramid. This is the floor of the chamber. The chamber is going to be 20 feet wide. We'll just do this square for simplicity's sake. But now you got your walls, your chamber floor, and a 20-foot opening. How are you going to put a ceiling across that? And then pile a literal mountain on top. You think you're just going to set a stone across there and call it a day? Well, you're never allowed on my job site because you're dangerous. Stone has an enormous amount of compression strength, which means that you can squeeze it in a vise or stack them up on top of each other, and it's really strong, not going to break. But it doesn't handle tension worth a crap. Just picture this setting on 2 walls each side. As soon as you put a load on top and it deflects, or the tension pulling apart at the bottom of it, it breaks. It's really brittle in that way. You know how we've got all these ancient temples with column after column after column? Well, that's because they're using a stone header across the top and they can only span 10 feet with it. And this doesn't have a mountain stacked on top of it afterwards. The Parthenon had this huge stone facade, but the actual roof over the interior of the building was just wood rafters, because you can't span hardly any distance with stone. This can kind of be used to date some buildings too, because it doesn't seem like they knew about the Roman arch beforehand. If you stack the stones in an arch, then you're putting everything back into compression strength because it's pushing down against each stone, where if you just set a flat one across here, then it's going to break. So going back to our chamber opening in the pyramid, the way they solved this was pretty ingenious because they were keeping the stones in compression rather than tension strength. If you stack each layer with like 4 inches hanging over, and then do the next one 4 inches over, now you're transferring all of that weight laterally and keeping the stone in compressive rather than tensile strength. And you're basically accomplishing the same principle as the Roman arch, only allegedly thousands of years before that. So back to our original opening, you really only have 2 choices on putting a ceiling on this. You can do an arch or you can baffle it like they did. So that's why I say they put this over all of the openings, but what do I know? The next thing is, I know everybody's all about the ultra precision stonework, but you're telling me that that's airtight? That you can fill this entire thing up and it's going to compress all the gases at the top? That's really not even possible, let alone practical in any way. We'll get back to practical in a minute, but while we're looking at stonework, just look at the surface of this and the thousands of little dimples across it. This is inside, so that's not erosion and weathering, but that pretty well proves it wasn't a saw blade, because a saw blade isn't going to leave dimples like that, or a laser. But this full-on laser precision is a grift that started before the time of the internet. This was in books in the 70s. None of this stuff is near as precise as people make it out to be online. Just with a small 1-foot square, you can already see an 1/8-inch gap at the top, 1/8-inch gap over here. And evidently people don't know there's a difference between polish and straightness. You can polish a bowling ball. That doesn't mean it's straight or flat. Polishing is just a finer surface treatment, but it doesn't have to be on a flat surface. This obviously isn't. And that pretty much rules out a mechanical saw or something, because a saw blade is going to cut flat. Everybody in the Egypt realm always defaults to copper chisels. Couldn't have done it with copper chisels. Well, okay, why are we jumping from that to laser technology instead of just saying, well, what if they had steel chisels? In Famiko's book, he says, one often comes across accounts of a steel chisel found in the external masonry of the Great Pyramid of Cheops. However, it is indeed most probable that the tool got there during a later age when the pyramid was being pillaged for building. So apparently they used to find steel chisels there all the time. The thing about metalworking is it's not ultra high technology stuff. People over in India pour bandsaws in dirt. These guys made that out of dirt and steel, and then all you need is something to make it spin. And we've had lathes for thousands of years. So I think the ancients could have had pretty advanced metalworking technologies. But I don't think they built the pyramids as a chemical reactor. Let's just go back to stage 1 logic. This should have been the first thing in everybody's mind, I would hope. You mean they built these pyramids to compress gases and zap it with lightning? That's kind of like inventing the dirt bike to dig some ruts to drop your corn in. It is way overbuilding for the task at hand. If they wanted to compress gases and zap it with lightning, they could have taken hollowed out logs with pitch all over the outside of it, so it's actually airtight, unlike the stone, and you can plunge 100 of these down and compress the gases up in the top and then stick a copper wire to a lightning rod. I could come up with 1,000 mechanisms for compressing air and doing what you're saying, and the pyramid would not be one of them. I don't know how many times I've heard people repeat that granite is conductive. And yeah, if you're on a granite mountain and it's got enough water in the granite and lightning strikes next to you, you'll get a shock out of it. But granite is a horrible conductor of electricity when you're talking about like electrical wiring or using electricity. For the way we use electricity, you could make insulators out of granite. These are used to keep the power going through the power line and not into the pole. So granite isn't a good conductor of electricity. I hear that all the time. The majority of the pyramid is made out of limestone, which is even way less conductive than the granite. And also the whole thing is sitting on the ground, which means it is grounded. So you could zap this thing with the thunderbolts of the gods and stand on the other side of it, and it's all just going straight into ground. So for all intents and purposes, there is no way you're running electricity through the pyramid. Oh, it's Tesla technology. No, it's not. If it was Tesla technology, then he would have built Warden Cliff Tower out of limestone and granite. He built that out of wood and steel for the structure part of it, and all the electrical part was copper. But it has been interesting to watch people for years act like the materials don't matter at all here, and granite is the same as copper. And then the last thing is, well, what about the smell of ammonia inside?
Staining, that this staining is all over the surface in the inside. For the longest time, we believed that it was the staining from the bats that lived in the inside, until a Russian team from an organization called the Asida Project, they took samples. I believe it was illegally taken, but they did a microscopic analysis. So this from the staining of bats, because it is there, and also from the quality of the stone. But then they found, the Asida Project found other elements like iridium and uranium and many, it's a big list. And they have it all listed if you are interested to know, and it's a mystery still.
Make sure you end off with it's a mystery still. Now, he mentioned bats being in there several times, and I've never been to a guano cave, but I've ripped open a few houses and found a rat's nest where they're peeing and pooping and just acrid, nasty ammonia smell. So the fact that bats lived in there for who knows how many centuries might have something to do with the ammonia smell. But, my ideas don't always make for the most exciting YouTube video. It helps a lot to point out things like laser
About
precision.
these cut and polished blocks here, within the opening chamber of the Red Pyramid, is just how fine.
So are we looking at the same wall here? Because he's calling this cut and polished blocks. That is not exactly how I would describe what I'm looking at. What I'm looking at almost has to be either a hand-chiseled finish or a really rough grinding surface. But this is something that, the play actors, that there used to be all those events at usually schools or somewhere, concerts and whatnot. It's strange how it's been quite a while since we've seen any of those, huh? But they play this game with people all the time. They have people seeing with their ears and not with their eyes. And a lot of times people don't notice. They hear him talking about the precision of these blocks, but aren't looking at what they're actually looking at. The pyramids are amazing works of engineering, but before I jump to space aliens and laser cut stones, I'm at least going to entertain the idea of, well, what if they did have steel tools? Well, then we've got half the equation solved. We know how they cut the stones. So then how do they transport them? Bam! With big muscled up aliens. Demons. No. Of this, I pretty much have no doubt. They floated everything straight down there. They dug a canal up to each one of these. And they floated the stones right there. If I get bored sometimes, I'll build a tripod and show you how they did the rest. Aside from that, you just need a few praying Homo Lazardus. Another thing that most people ignore is 99% of all these stones are as imprecise as could be. It's definitely not like today where we cut everything into uniform blocks. But hey, I did think that the chemical plant was a very interesting concept. It's definitely original. The dude wrote a book on it. I hope he made all kinds of money. But on a truthiness scale of 1 to 10, I'll give it about a 0.5. But I do hope that everybody learned that the use of granite for electrical purposes is pretty much a very ridiculous idea. And with a pyramid or an obelisk or whatever sitting directly on the ground with no insulator, then it is ground. And electricity always seeks ground, so it's just going to travel through it straight into the earth and dissipate harmlessly. Sorry, it's just a fact. But hey, if that's what you want to believe, more power to you. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I'll catch you on the next one. Static out.